Hello and welcome to this edition of Back in History Plus. In Back in History Plus, we tell stories through pictures. In this edition, we're discussing the first military coup in West Africa. Now, this coup appears to have opened the floodgates for several other coups that have happened in West Africa and the other, parts of the African continent. Africa has experienced several coups from the early 1960s down to late 1990s, until today Africa is still witnessing the violent takeover of government by the military. Now, the first military coup in West Africa took place in Togo. Togo is a country in West Africa. So the military here invaded the presidential lodge in Togo and then removed the democratically elected president. And that was the very first time that such violent takeover of power occurred in West Africa and in Togo in particular. The country Togo is bordered by Ghana to the west. This is Ghana, bordering Togo to the west. By the Republic of Benin to the east. This is the Republic of Benin. And by Burkina Faso, to the north. It also has a boundary with Nigeria. And it stretches southwards to the Gulf of Guinea, massive water here which opens Togo to the international maritime world, the international transportation and everything in the maritime industry opening into the Gulf of Guinea. And Togo has Lomé as its capital. Togo is just a small tropical country with an approximate landmass of 22,000 square miles and a population of just 8 million people. The population of people in Lagos, which is just a state in Nigeria, is more than the entire population of Togo. The population of River State in Nigeria, which is just a state, population of Akwa Ibom, population of a couple of other states in Nigeria, is far beyond the population of the entire country of Togo. And the same with other countries in Africa that have more population than Togo. But Togo is very significant to the African narrative. Now, like most African entities, Togo also came under years of colonial, administration. Togo was was colonized by France, and France remained in Togo for several years. And when the independence struggle started, it eventually yielded fruit, and in April 1960, Togo was granted independence by its colonial, masters. Upon the grant of independence to Togo, Togo then went to the polls for presidential election to elect the first civilian president of the country. And the man here, Sylvanus Olympio, had been part and parcel of the independence struggle in Togo for many years, had participated in galvanizing the people of Togo for independence. And so when Togo became an independent country, it was natural for those independence advocates to participate in the election. So Sylvanus Olympio in 1961 participated in the election and won the election, and thus became the first president of the Republic of Togo. Now, he started his administration on a very good note. And then, as a new country, there was so much for him to do, a new independent country, there was so much for him to do and put things in place for the smooth takeoff of his administration. And he did that for 3 years. Now, while he was in office, he had visitors visit him in his office. And the visitors were led by Nosingbe Yadema. Nosingbe Yadema had been in the French army for several years, for 10 years in particular. This is Nosingbe Yadema, okay? He worked in the French army for 10 years. And in 1962, he resigned from the French army. Why he resigned was that he said he experienced some discriminatory tendencies in the army of France, and therefore decided to resign after putting 10 years there. And he came back home with his colleagues that were with him also in the French army. And when he came back home, he made a visit to the president who was President Olympio. I mean, that was President Olympio. This is the man. He visited him and asked that he be absorbed into the French army together with other of his colleagues that had resigned from the French army. And President Olympio refused to absorb them into the army. He must have had his reasons. As the president, he must have had security reasons not to absorb them into the army. But that decision would later cost the president's life, to the extent that some persons said if the president had known, he ought to have absorbed them into the army. No, he refused them, and then they went back home. Presidents never knew that these people that went back home, they had a plan against him. And on the 13th day of January 1963, President Olympio's office was invaded by armed soldiers led by Nasingbe Yadema and the other soldiers that came back from France. And the president was removed from office in the first military coup. That was the day the first military coup in West Africa occurred. So the president was removed from the office violently and he was assassinated. Olympio died instantly, and there was no issue of even taking him to the hospital for him to be resuscitated. That coup was led by Nasingbe Yadema, the man that came and said he should be absorbed, and the president said no. He led the coup together with other nationals of Togo that came back and made the request to President Olympio for them to be absorbed into the army. So it was in 1963 that the very first military coup was carried out against the president of Togo, President Olympio. And following the brutal assassination of President Olympio, another person was immediately brought on board. And this is the man that was brought on board, Nicholas Gronitsky. Nicholas Gronitsky was assisted to power by Eyadema. At this time, Nasingbe Eyadema was just a sergeant. He wasn't even a high-ranking officer, but he was a very powerful person. So he was able, having assassinated the former president, he was able to assist Gronitsky to come to power as the president of Togo. At this time, Eyadema was a highly feared person throughout the whole of Togo. Who wouldn't fear him? He came back from France, sought to be absorbed into the army with his colleagues. The sitting president said, no, I'm not going to absorb you. And the next thing that happened, Eyadema led a group of soldiers to invade the office of the president, remove him violently, and then killed him, and then took over the reins of power and handed it over to Gronitsky. So Eyadema became a very highly feared person in Togo. No one wanted to test his will. It was a case of every man, to his own lane. Nobody wanted to test him. As a matter of fact, the new government did everything to rather impress Eyadema. And so the new government appointed Eyadema as a Minister of Defense and then gave him promotion and then absorbed these other people that came back with him into the army so as just to appease them and not to incur their wrath. For 4 years, Eyadema had worked with Gronitsky as the president of Togo. And Eyadema, like I said, became the Minister of Defense and wielded so much power. He worked under a close relationship with President Gronitsky until 4 years after, Eyadema fell out with President Gronitsky. He then mobilized soldiers under his command and staged a second military coup in Togo and removed Gronitsky from power. Again, a very powerful Eyadema whom nobody wanted to joke with. In this second coup, however, which removed Gronitsky from power, his life was spared. So, unlike the first coup that the president was killed, Gronitsky's life was spared. But he was frightened to the extent that he could not live in the country anymore, and then he fled to take refuge in France. Eyadema then announced himself on 14th April 1967 as the first military president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Togo, and also made himself the Minister of Defense. Now, Eyadema held these offices from 1967 till his death in 2005. Eyadema never trusted anybody with the office of Minister of Defense. He knew the power of the Minister of Defense. He knew that as Minister of Defense, he was able to stage a coup and remove Gronitsky, and therefore he never trusted anybody with the office of Minister of Defense. He later succeeded himself as civilian president, like it was done by other sit-tight leaders who had been in governance for many years. So he removed the military uniform, and then he had to dress this way as a civilian president, contested several elections, and then he kept winning. Nobody was able to defeat Eyadema. Eyadema eventually died in 2005 on his way for medical treatment. He died in the air. The plane just landed, basically landed just for formalities, and then took off again with his corpse and bring him back. When he died, he was immediately succeeded by his son, Flurry Nasingbe. And the Eyadema dynasty still continued to be the dynasty governing Togo for several years. Flurry Nasingbe has been in Togo as the president of the country for several years. So this is the story of the first military coup in Togo, which is a country in West Africa. It is also the first military coup in the whole of West Africa. And like I said, this coup appears to have given a strength and energy for others to plot and execute several coups in the African continent up till today. I do hope you have learned one or two things from this very edition of Back in History Plus. Subscribe to the channel so that together we can continue to learn from the vast reserve of history that is so much in the African continent, which we are going to learn as much as possible as we proceed. Thank you so much for watching. I remain your friend and your host, and I promise to return on this same channel very soon with more stories.